When people talk about wealth, influence, and power, one group is mentioned again and again. Sometimes with admiration, sometimes with suspicion, sometimes with conspiracy. The Jewish people. From medieval Europe to Wall Street, from Ottoman courts to Hollywood studios, Jewish names appear disproportionately often in finance, science, culture, and media. But here is the real question. Was it always like this? Was it intentional? Was it religious? Was it political? Or was it simply survival? Today, we are not repeating stereotypes, we are not promoting myths, and we are not telling conspiracy stories. Today, we are telling a historical story. A story of displacement, a story of law, a story of education, a story of exclusion, and a story of turning limitations into strategy. This is the long and complicated story of how some Jewish communities became economically influential. To understand this story, we must go back more than 2,500 years. 586 BCE, the Babylonian Empire conquered the kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem was destroyed, and a large part of the Jewish population was deported. Until then, most Jews were farmers, miners, and craftsmen, just like everyone else. But in exile, land ownership was no longer possible. So they adapted. They moved into trade, administration, accounting, record-keeping, lending. Not because of greed, not because of genetics, but because survival demanded it. This was the first major shift. In the ancient world, most people could not read, but Jewish religious life required literacy. Every boy was expected to study, to read sacred texts, to memorize laws, to debate interpretations. This created something extremely rare, a highly literate minority. That meant they could write contracts, they could keep accounts, they could manage long-distance correspondence, they could organize trade. And when Jews were expelled again and again, by Rome, by medieval kingdoms, by Christian states, they didn't lose their profession. They lost their homes. So they rebuilt elsewhere, with the same skills. In medieval Christian Europe, charging interest was forbidden. In Islamic law, it was also restricted. But Jewish law made a distinction. Interest was forbidden between Jews, but permitted with outsiders. This was not about exploitation. It was about legal categories. So when Christian and Muslim societies needed credit, they often had only one option: Jewish lenders. This made Jews highly visible. Visibility created resentment. Resentment created scapegoating, and the cycle repeated. When Jews were expelled from England, 1290, France, 1394, Spain, 1492, Portugal, 1497, they lost everything: homes, businesses, property, but they did not lose their networks. They migrated to the Ottoman Empire, the Netherlands, North Africa, Eastern Europe, and again they adapted. In the Ottoman Empire, something different happened. Jews were not locked into ghettos. They were not excluded from economic life. They lived under the millet system. They governed their internal affairs, practiced their religion, and traded freely. They became merchants, physicians, diplomats, printers, jewelers, financiers. The first printing presses in Istanbul were Jewish. They introduced new medical knowledge. They connected international trade routes. Mobility created adaptability. Over centuries, Jewish families learned something extremely valuable: how to move money across borders. Before modern banks existed, this was revolutionary. They built family-based trust networks, cross-border credit systems, currency exchange mechanisms. This laid the foundation for modern banking. When European states began fighting large-scale wars, they needed massive capital, and certain Jewish banking families rose. The most famous example is the Rothschild family. 5 brothers, 5 cities: Frankfurt, London, Paris, Vienna, Naples. They used speed, information, and trust. They financed governments, wars, infrastructure, railroads. They didn't control the world. They provided liquidity, and in capitalism, liquidity equals power. Power attracts myths. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, millions of Jews fled pogroms in Eastern Europe. They arrived in America poor. They worked as tailors, shoemakers, factory workers. But within 1 or 2 generations, they moved into commerce, law, academia, media, entertainment. Hollywood itself was built largely by Jewish immigrants. Why? Because new industries are risky. Established elites avoid risk, outsiders don't. This story is not unique to Jews. It is about minorities. When a group is displaced, excluded from land ownership, barred from traditional professions, forced into mobility, they adapt. They invest in education, trade, networks, portable skills. This happened with Armenians, Lebanese traders, Chinese diasporas, Indian merchant communities. Jews were not unique. They were early. Here is the part people rarely discuss. Visibility creates myths. Myths create fear. Fear creates scapegoats. Economic success does not mean secret control. Influence does not mean conspiracy. History is complex. The story of Jewish economic influence is not a story about greed. It is a story about displacement, adaptation, education, networks, survival. When people are denied stability, they create mobility. When denied land, they create knowledge. When denied belonging, they create networks. This is not a Jewish lesson. It is a human one.